Do you know where the word mentor came from? Odyssey, Odysseus, when he had to leave his son and go on his journey, he left him with his friend, Mentor. The traditional mentor is that friend, that you can trust with your child. There are different ways that we could define mentor. Some of my best mentors are Walt Disney, Tony Robbins, Steve Jobs, Alex and Layla Hormozi now. Most of them, in fact, none of them really know I exist, but they're some of my greatest mentors.
In today's episode, we want to focus on mentorship. It's something that a lot of people talk about, but what does it really mean? Like, what are the benefits of it, and of the right mentor, and how do you even go about finding one? So, Michael, how many of your past mentors would you say were fruitful and kind of you benefited from them the way that you thought you would benefit from them?
Everyone was amazing. I'm just kidding.
No mentor is a bad mentor.
Yeah, no, I do think everybody enters it though sometimes, and they could feel like they fail sometimes if you don't get the right thing out of partnership. But ultimately, I think it's a really tricky one to answer. I think what helps first to really define is what a mentor is, because I think different people look at them in different ways. And I would describe it as you have a mentor who could be the sort of one-on-one relationship, which is how a lot of people think about a mentor. But there's also virtual mentors. You and I, being a fan of Tony Robbins, I think we'd both see him as a, virtual mentor for him. And while we've been to, one of his events, so I guess you could argue and say we kind of met him maybe there, or at least we were there. You can have virtual mentors that you never meet. You might also have mentors in the form of like a mastermind or group, of coaching and that sort of thing. So there are lots of different types of mentors that anybody can have. And actually, when I was doing a little bit of prep for this, one of the things I came across that I thought was really interesting, and I'm curious if you know this, but do you know where the word mentor came from?
Oh my God. I read it before. I don't remember.
Yeah. So if I can get the names all right. So it's in the Odyssey. It goes back to Greek mythology, which I know you and I are both a fan of. And so the Odyssey, Odysseus, when he had to leave his son and go on his journey, he left him with his friend Mentor to take care of him.
I remember
and
that.
And that's where Mentor comes, which I thought was really interesting. So the traditional mentor is that friend that you can trust with your child. So again, there are different ways that we could define mentor. And for me, I'd go on and say right now some of my best mentors are Walt Disney, Tony Robbins, Steve Jobs, Alex and Layla Hormozi now, who are blowing it up on YouTube. Most of them, in fact, none of them really know I exist, but they're some of my greatest, mentors. And recently I had joined a mastermind when it came to me setting up my first short-term rental and moving into that as a business. And once more, in that scenario, that group I was part of, great mentors, both on a peer level, as well as, Rob Abasolo, who was a mentor for me in setting up short terms. But there's also in the workplace, something that you and I both experienced at Disney is they had the sort of arranged marriage of mentors at times, which is great when companies do go through the idea of trying to help pair people, especially when people are uncomfortable or trying to navigate it. But that's where I find it actually can be even more hit and miss. And I think the reason is because sometimes when it's arranged like that, the individual and that person may not always be that perfect match. And I think that's where sometimes they're not as fruitful as we would hope, versus if you seek it out with a specific purpose instead of trying to fulfill a corporate purpose. What about you? What would you say as far as how fruitful they were for you?
Yeah, before I answer, going back to what you said, those different type of categories that you describe, I think they all serve a different purpose when it comes to mentorship. I fully agree. I don't think you should just have one. You should have one in each of those categories if you can find the right match.
Yeah.
For me, those virtual mentors you mentioned, some of them we share common, and then I turn to a lot of my sports mentors.
Totally.
One being right behind me. I find a lot of motivation in these virtual mentors, whether it's Mamba mentality and what Kobe did, or Jordan, or LeBron. What these athletes do is inspiring. So I draw on them for inspiration and motivation. Then you have people like Tony Robbins or people that are not alive today. There's a lot of knowledge you could kind of suck from them.
Yeah.
Then there is people that actually you interact with. I would say that I don't think any of my arranged marriage mentors were fruitful.
Yeah.
I think the problem is that, one, when a large company, now a small company might have more success with it, but a large company, when they set out to do this type of mentorship program, people that don't even like being mentors sometimes raise their hand because they feel like they have to. Otherwise, HR and leadership might frown upon on them. So then you have a big pool of people that don't even want to be mentored. It's not their thing, end up being matched with people that are desperate and looking for that mentor-mentee relationship. And it goes south. And unfortunately, I feel like in those situations that I was in the past, I always came across a person that seemed like they were just trying to check off a box and look like on paper that they were participating, that they really weren't. That unfortunately, I can't say that any of my arranged marriages were fruitful. My most fruitful mentorships came from unofficial mentors and people that I built relationships with, and sometimes people that you're like yourself, like not truly a mentor-mentee relationship, but there's so much there that I learned from you that could be thought of as, this mentor, somebody that I can bounce ideas off of. To me, that's where it was more fruitful. The arranged marriage ones suck. Sorry to say.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And by the way, I remember teaching you to tie your shoe when you were 24, and I took a lot of pride in.
That was good mentorship.
Yeah. I'm glad you finally almost got no.
You also taught me how to. You also taught me how to hit people with rubber bands. That was good too.
That's exactly. Yeah, these are skills you need in life. So I think I will say that some of my arranged ones I did still get something out of, but I will say that it wasn't. I had to work a bit harder to try to find what that was at the time, and what I will say that came out of it was a little bit more indirect, but I knew it was happening. And it's actually something I try to work with my clients now around too. And that's that sometimes the mentorship that you're in, if it's meaningful for those who control the promotions and they see that as an investment in you, and they therefore now feel more, they're more likely to advocate for you, then I think that is where, while you may not get much out of the actual engagements and grow from that, you may still get some benefits in career growth.
Yeah. The other, again, I don't want to generalize because this doesn't apply to everybody, but I think what happens is people go through different stages of their career. You have that first 15 years or so that you're kind of in that. Now, let's take out entrepreneurship out of this picture. Let's say you're in the corporate environment. That first 10, 15 years, you really are trying to get it into that, entry level executive role, like your middle management executive. Then once you've established yourself as an executive, now you're trying to actually expand your reach and your influence as an executive. Then the last 15 years, you're not really pushing for that anymore. The last 15 of your career, you are in a place where you want to give back. And to me, those are the ideal mentors because they're not doing mentorship to try to win a promotion or whatever. They're doing it because truly they want to give back. And I found, in my experience, people that are mentally in that place that are ready to give back make the best mentors.
I'm going to disagree. So in spirit, I hear what you're saying, but the best mentors actually to me were the ones who had this mentor-like approach and ability. It's almost those natural leaders that you have. So who knows? People may or may not, they could say what they may about us, but I do believe that despite the level we were at, we have always been interested in them. We have a podcast now we're doing where we're literally going out and we've named it in honor of the Jedi because we want to mentor and help others. And I think there were
how many others can you count on your finger that you think had an interest in mentorship at our age?
Sometimes I think it is, a bit more difficult, or sometimes I think also people make this mistake of aiming for I work at Disney and I want Bob Iger to be my mentor. It's like, sure, I get it, but pump the brakes. What you really need is the person who's only, that maybe 5 years max ahead of you, maybe a couple years ahead of you. Like, you don't need somebody that far ahead of you. And that's, I think, a big mistake that a lot of people make is they want that person who is, far ahead in advance. And I think with what you were just saying, the tricky piece with that is sometimes when you have that person who's that mentor who is at that stage or phase of their life, well, the problem is they're now not always as connected with the realities of what somebody might go through now earlier in their career. Because as an example, we worked with somebody before and their mentorship to us would have been, you just got to put in your time. I put in 16 years before and it's like people today, instead it's like, okay, I hear you. But today with the tools and everything we have, you need to make sure you have that mentor who's able to bridge what worked for them versus taking the right sensibilities and applying it to today. So anyway, I get where you're coming from, but I do think that the people who are good mentors later, I don't know, it's kind of like that thing. It's like I forget how it goes, but you give somebody money, enough money, you'll see who they truly are. And I feel like, when it comes to these leaders and these mentors, I do think that there are these individuals who are more givers. And I think that starts earlier.
It's that servant leadership mentality.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So, a mentor, ironically, I know you and I both actually ended up going after at the same time, which was hilarious because neither one of us knew the other one was doing it. And, here, I can't remember if
go figure, right? Everything that kind of we've done in parallel knowingly, and there's stuff that we did in parallel without even knowing too.
Yeah, still find it. I can't remember what that was, if we caught one of the others with the same mentor or if we just talked about it and then it turns out we were. But in that case, I think this is another thing too, is while I don't think we had loads of time with this particular individual because they were at the time, a president of distribution at Disney. In fact, most our leaders at the time, I think, were both kind of being like, no, that person's too, they're too high up and just stick within our org. But we were filling the limitations, as you expressed, within our org that we're like, look, we want to look outside of that. In fact, I turned down a mentor and I wasn't sure if it was going to be career suicide at the time that they wanted to pair me with, just because I'm like, look, I already have a relationship with this person. You don't need to now put it on some sort of a corporate book that says you are now formally, joined. I'm like, no, I'd rather this actually feel more like it's something we're doing because we want to instead of because it's arranged. But back with this individual, while there weren't loads of meetings, like the warmth and how quickly, took us, kind of under the wing, but also I learned something then that at times I'm like, all right, am I getting loads from this? But like, as I looked at it afterwards, I'm like, it was huge because what I could see is that what I was striving for, this person was able to, 5 years ahead of me, but who was a fast riser himself. It's like, you could look at it and you'd be like, oh my gosh, they're struggling with a similar thing now. So it doesn't actually stop. And I think a lot of that was, and this is what this person eventually realized too, when they left, is that a lot of the struggle in that scenario was, also trying to seek out the things that were going to bring us more long-term fulfillment. And hence, in some ways, this podcast and stuff like that we're working towards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you make a great point. I think, especially people early in their careers, there is this fear of connecting with somebody with a fancy title.
Yeah.
Thinking that they figured it out, they know it all, they don't have time for you. But the reality is, they still have the same challenges that you have. Maybe it's, and actually their challenges are probably more stressful than yours. But there is no reason to fear reaching out to a fancy title. Sure, you might not hear back if you're trying to reach the CEO of a giant corporation, but there still shouldn't be a fear.
Yeah. As long as it's the right prep. And I think, we can jump into some of that in a minute here, but I think, it comes down to making sure that it's clear that like how people are going to use their time wisely. And this is why the danger of somebody saying, I want Bob Iger for a mentor. It's like, but what are you going to ask Bob Iger? Are you going to go and ask Bob Iger, hey, I'm having some interpersonal relationship with my boss. It's like, this is somebody who's running this company. I'm sure he could answer it and he'd be brilliant about it. But it's like, hold on a second. And the other thing in that case too, is the first thing I'd say to somebody like that is, have you read the book yet? And by the way, most people would probably say no. It's like, start there, because otherwise you're seeking a mentor in hopes for it to solve your problems, like the magical pill, when what you really need to do is get clear on your struggle and then look to, the people who might be able to, again, help, who've already solved that, who are more adjacent and closer to you. And I think the other big benefit with that too is when you start to do that, those individuals can hopefully start to, I read it in a book before and I really like the idea of sponsorship. So a mentor is somebody who, you go to for advice and they're there. But a sponsor is more of an advocate. If you think about it in terms of race car, driving, it's like sports in general, but race car driving is a good way. The cars, they literally will have a brand on that car, and that brand is saying, we stand behind this person 100%. That's the advocate. That's the sponsor. And that happens when people enter these relationships, not just thinking about what's in it for them, but also thinking about it in terms of, okay, what is this person trying to achieve? How can I help this person achieve it? And what I like to then call it, because some people talk about mentorships being a two-way street. Well, I believe in the three-way street, which is when you actually are really contributing and helping each other out. You actually can help each other out in your careers. And this is why somebody more proximate is more valuable, in my opinion. And that's because now what you can do is not only is it helping you and them, but it's helping the company as well. And when that happens, you start kind of helping each other, with that climb. But I think a lot of people overlook because they're almost collecting mentors and they almost be like, I've got this mentor and this mentor, instead of really honing in on what it is they need right now to get to whatever the next step in their career is in the next year or 2 years, instead of, again, Bob Iger, let me know how I can make a movie for you.
Yeah. I did read a survey, I think it's from Deloitte, that said about 77% of organizations globally have some kind of mentorship program in place. Now, even though it sounds like I'm being devil's advocate to exactly what I said, it's good that they have the program. It's better than the 23% that don't. Yeah. It's just, how do you make sure you position yourself to maximize on that within that program? And knowing that if it's not fruitful, quickly raise your hand and try to get in a more meaningful arranged marriage versus one that doesn't work out.
What I think is tricky in that situation, though, sometimes is that, you don't want that to burn a bridge now with that mentor. So I think, obviously organizations, they have plenty of statistics that support in their studies that will say why this is actually better and people are more engaged. And sometimes it makes somebody feel important. For you and I know it did to this degree. It's like when we were paired up with these individuals, like, oh, they see us on a track, and that was great. But I think what it is sometimes I feel like, just like we had with some of our mentors, you still go through it. Hopefully you can think about how you can pull some value out. And if nothing else, how can you make them feel more valued? And by the way, that's another reason I think it's beneficial to find those earlier mentors. I actually think a lot of the time it doesn't happen enough, meaning when people don't spend as much time with these mid-level because they're looking at that next level. But the mid-level sometimes will have more time to give, and the mid-level is sometimes even more like, oh my gosh, you care. As long as you can find the right mid-level who is truly interested in mentoring.
Yeah, one of the other tricks or hacks, if you are paired with somebody that's not really into being a mentor, it's just happening because they need to fulfill an obligation. That person probably loves to talk about themselves and their org and what their problems are. You could use that as a way to find out what's actually keeping that person up at night. And that might be a way for you to figure out what are some other problems organizations facing, and then leverage that to go try to solve it and get the spotlight shine on you. So there's still ways you could use it to your benefits, even though it might not be a true mentorship thing to happen.
I agree. And by the way, who knows? Maybe that's where eventually the mentee can become the mentor, which I think is also possible. I don't think age matters when it comes to this sort of thing. And,
no, 100% not.
Yeah, it's like I learned a lot from people, and I still do. Heck, my son sometimes teaches me stuff now that I'm like, holy cow, I was 11 years old. I'm like, oh, thank you. But I do think that yeah, I think every mentorship can be turned into something positive as long as you're looking how to do it. And I think if you're married with somebody, for this period of time, you want to look and see how you can do that, because you never know where it goes in the future. And I think trying to think about how you can foster that, if nothing else, you then turn it into it and say, well, you know what, we may not have a lot here, but I am going to turn this into a possibility of where I can help, them out. And the more you're working towards that, it's kind of like in a relationship. The more you're working towards making sure you're always fostering the healthy relationship, then the more successful you'll be. Let's touch on here, because I want to make sure for individuals, it's like, I think we've already said the benefits, but it's like, obviously this could have a really positive impact on your career. And I'm hoping we don't have to talk anybody into, why they should get a mentor, but there's some really interesting data out there that suggests that people with, who receive mentoring are actually, I think it's promoted 5 times more than often than those who do not have a mentor. And I think this is because, you get an accelerator to knowledge and expertise. But at the same time, it's the network and connections that start to unlock. And I believe in a lot of these cases, these people who are doing it, I'm going to say that they're leveraging what I was mentioning before about more of that sponsorship and advocate. But when you're not there and somebody has to say, should so-and-so get this promotion? It's like, well, you want people to chime in because their interactions with you have been positive, and they believe that, especially because maybe they helped to grow you, they're even more vested. They want to do that. But there's also other studies that suggest that people are happier in their roles when they have mentorship, and it increases, diversity and inclusion as well, because oftentimes otherwise there's people who are marginalized if they're not getting these programs that workplaces put in, place. Higher retention is yet one more. And then, something that can be underestimated, and while it might be shunned upon because people don't want anybody coming in, to a mentor, at least they common, dialogue around it would say you don't want to go into a mentor crying, but at the same time, there is a level of emotional support that can come from these mentors too that is really important. And I think, look, you or I, if anybody ever came into that state, it's like, how can we help? We want to get them out of that state and try to help them not have to return to that state in the future. So I think all of these things, and just the feedback and perspective too, because a lot of people are in jobs, but their boss is horrible at feedback, or is just kind of in their own little, they might be doing what people call quiet quitting. And if your boss is quiet quitting, then you might not be getting what you need to grow in the way you need to. And I think that's another, huge benefits. And anyway, and I think beyond that too, just like something else, and I know something you help people with, is then there's these mentors who can actually help people who are trying to develop in like the entrepreneurial side of things and who have experience there. And that's once more another area that can be great when people are thinking about pivoting careers or doing these side hustles. Like, once more, super valuable to be able to look at and engage them there. So any benefits I left off? I'm sure there's some, but
I think the right mentorship, and again, we're focused on the corporate world. It'll probably be very beneficial to do a different episode on entrepreneurship, side hustle side of mentorship, because I think that's a very different angle. But when we focus on corporate world, I think the other benefit is you can actually make a lifelong friend mentor, because if it could grow outside of that 3 to 6 month, 12 months program, whatever it was, and carries with you through your lifetime. I don't have that myself through the program, but I have created that relationship with others that I feel like they're now lifelong mentors and friends now that I can go to for advice. And that definitely can happen. And the other thing that it's sometimes I think people don't really understand how to do is, okay, let's say that there is no program, or I was not part of the program. Well, how do I even go about finding a mentor? And sometimes people get stuck at this. And I think, to start, and I'll start it, but I'll pass it to you to see what else you have to add.
Sure.
I think you first have to understand what your goals are anyways, because if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, there is almost zero mentor that's going to help you get there. So you have to be crystal clear on what is that you want out of this mentorship relationship. And then you go into, well, who is that list of mine? And don't be scared that if they have a fancy title, what's the worst that can happen? You're going to end up at the same place of not having that person as a mentor if they say no. So it's like, just go for it. And then you just, request a coffee or an email. I mean, just start by the initial poke, interaction, trigger, email, whatever. Just start, and you never know where it can take you. LinkedIn sometimes is a pretty valuable place to reach out to someone and see if what they're about, and then slowly go into asking if they're open to being a mentor for you. So I think that going about it is not that hard. It's just you need to take action and not let fear hold you back as if you're bothering that person. But the reality is that if that person is actually the type that loves to mentor, you're actually going to tickle their ego. So you're not actually bothering them.
Totally agree. Giving somebody significance is the most valuable thing you can do for them.
Yeah,
and I think
for sure. That the need for significance doesn't go away. It's always there. Yeah. It's just the way you achieve that need changes.
Agreed. You mentioned LinkedIn, and just one thing I say there too is it can become a really easy way there because, just think about us right now who are active on there, and we know other people who are active on there. It's like that's a gateway into it, because when somebody's not sure and they do want to reach out to someone, well, start off by commenting on some of their posts, like their posts. Like, there's a way that you get in front of them, so it also feels like you are giving some of the significance before you go and ask for their time in return. And I think that's another important thing to do. Is some people just want to, jump straight in to the marriage before they dated, and there's some things you could do, in advance to, I think, prepare yourself. And I think once you're in that mentorship, though, because I think you nailed sort of the key things, but once you're in there, I think you want to establish the mutual expectations. I think is important too, and make sure, like, what does it mean? What does it look like? Like, how does this person prefer to communicate? How does this person actually want to, how often are you going to meet up? Are you looking for them, or are they going to come to you and be like, look, I see you said this is what you want to accomplish. Well, I'm going to create a plan for you. Or maybe instead they will just go through and say, here's what I recommend. You take note, and then you start delivering against that. But I think those expectations and making sure you're still over delivering on them, because this is somebody who's giving you their time, and in exchange, you want to give them the significance by showing that you're taking what they're saying and putting it into effect. But anything else you'd recommend to somebody who has like a mentor now to maximize and get the most out of that relationship?
Outside of the tactical stuff of always have an agenda, so you're not going there blind and trying to figure out on the fly what to talk about. The other strategy is, while you're there as a mentor, as a mentee to this person, also always in the back of your mind, think of it as a job interview. Because you actually, with all the changes that happen so fast in the corporate world, you never know. Next thing you know, there's a reorg and you're moved under this person. So always think of it as a job interview. Don't be late. If you promise you're going to do something, do it. So just think of it as a potential job interview and always over deliver, because you never know. So it's better to be prepared.
Yep. Nope. That's a great point. And I think actually it's probably where a lot of the internal, promotions and movements and things I've seen is because somebody has made this connection with somebody else, and suddenly they're like, I want them over here on, my team. I think that's a great way for somebody who's also struggling with a boss and looking for ways that they can actually work around the boss or into other new roles. And it's especially important if somebody is looking to change, not positions, but also maybe fields. Like if they're in operations, they want to go to marketing. It's like, well, then great. This is where you build a relationship. You let that person see what you're capable of. You help them out, and now they're willing to take more of a chance on you. One of the things I also wanted to, highlight too, going back to the mentor I was talking about earlier, you and I both, had engaged at the time, because, there were individuals being like too busy and all these other things. The way that I approached him at the time was I actually recognizing that he had 3 boys of his own. I had 2 at the time. I now have 3. But my wife's really, artsy, really good with the, the chalkboard. And she did up this really nice, frame chalkboard that said, will you mentor my daddy? And I had my, two now older ones at the time, hold it. And I sent that in the email to him with me asking and saying the things I really respect about him and what I think I would be able to take away from that mentorship. And, he came back with basically an ecstatic, of course, let's do this. And he loved that. He loved that approach. It made me stand out a bit more, which I think is something else that other people may want to consider, because it takes me back to when we were writing screenplays. You need to get everybody's writing screenplays, everybody's stories log line, while there's a bureaucracy to how you have to get it done, ultimately, oftentimes there's these stories you hear about where somebody found a really unique way to get in front of the right person. And sometimes that's what you also have to consider when you're doing this. And you want to make it so that it's not just you, but that somehow speaks to them. And I did know that at the time, my boys, knowing he was a father too, that was going to automatically create this mutual connection. And I think back to what you were mentioning in the coffee or other ways, or whether it's through LinkedIn, you're looking for the thing that you have that's mutual. If it's your love for skiing, maybe that's what you bond around. Whatever that love is, think about it so that you can find it. Could be a charity, who knows, but find a way to connect around that will help to accelerate, the rapport building.
Yeah. Creativity goes a long way. I mean, that's definitely how you stand out. I not to get too deep into this, but recently, because of all the layoffs and such a larger pool than normal of people out in the marketplace, I'm reading stories of different things people are doing. I read a story of somebody jumping off of an airplane with a sign, kind of not a chalkboard, but with a sign up that says what they're looking for. And that went viral because it was so different and creative. So I'm not advocating that everybody should go jump off a plane right now, but creativity does help you stand out. So don't be scared to get creative around your approach on connecting with somebody that you admire and would love as a mentor. Great story. Any last thoughts, Michael, before we end this episode?
Just one thing, because it feels like it's, always got to somehow bring, the ChatGPT AI back into it. This popular thing.
Of course, why not?
Right, exactly. But I think right now it's really interesting what tools like that, and I'm sure they're only going to improve, are allowing people right now, is you can go in there and you can ask these tools, like if there's something that you are struggling with, and you can almost get that virtual mentor experience. But it's really interesting because one of the downsides about a virtual mentor is you're not getting that feedback real time. You'll never fully replace that. But what's really interesting right now is you could go in now with these prompts to ChatGPT, and you could actually say to it, hey, please answer me this question, but I'd like you to do it as if you were Abraham Lincoln, known for his, deep thinking and principled decision making. Or maybe, it's Elon Musk, and you question about innovation or how you could, create, your own blue ocean, or Breen Brown. Pick your person. The bottom line is you go in and you could ultimately ask for it to answer you based on the thing that you're in. So think about who the right mentor might be for that, and it'll answer it. And just as an example, I did give a prompt for in advance of this. And I said, you're Walt Disney and you're going to help me be a better entrepreneur. What should I do? And when summarizing it, ultimately ChatGPT replied, embrace creativity and innovation, set clear goals and visualize success, take calculated risks, build a strong team, continuously learn and adapt, focus on customer experience, persevere and stay resilient, build a strong brand, network and collaborate, and stay true to your passion and purpose. And not too shabby. And you can literally drill into each one of these. There was so much more. And having read some books on Walt, as well as, some of what Walt Disney themselves try to stay true to, which actually relate to several of these, I think it's pretty incredible what you can get there. And while I don't think it replaces the in-person and the value there, I do think that at times it should be part of that kit where you're thinking about it. And when you do want somebody who's going to give you advice, you need to think about who, not only the ones you know today, but who are the experts in the space, because ChatGPT is able to pull in essence, simulate a response that may not always be perfect, but as I've seen through some of these examples, is pretty solid. And if you really want, you could then take another step. And if maybe your style is, Quentin Tarantino movie, you could say, and read it to me, or stage it in the style of Quentin Tarantino, and it'll write to you in that style as well. So it's just an incredible tool to be able to leverage. And I think people should also consider where it makes sense, a tool like that when they're trying to understand how they could level themselves up, or what kind of advice they might do in a situation they're in. It shouldn't just be that, but I think it should be one of the things they consider.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. It's amazing. It's definitely what you've just, read. It's definitely a great blueprint. It's not the only thing that you should do, but it's definitely good. You can probably also use it to prepare for your meetings with your mentor, whether it's getting an agenda ready or some talking points to get it ready. So ChatGTP is a brilliant tool.
You know what? One more thing you could do on that too is you could actually go in and tell it people who are struggling on LinkedIn or trying to think about how to engage. Once more, given the right prompt, asking it what you're trying to do, it will come back, and it just removes a little bit of that fear then, because you get the confidence, because it is like that peer or somebody who's helping to mentor you in the process.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for watching or listening. Again, please subscribe, like, share, comment if you want to hear us talk about anything else. We will love your support. And, we started this podcast to be your mentor. So we definitely want to hear what you think on what are we doing. And we want to be your Jedi. So thank you again. This is the way.
This is the way.